It was a Tuesday, I think. The kind of Tuesday that feels like any other day. The sun was out. The birds were singing. I was washing the breakfast dishes, looking out the window at my rose bushes. The phone rang. It was my granddaughter, Meyer. Her voice was small. It was a whisper almost. She said, Grandpa isn't waking up." And in that single moment, the entire world went silent. The plate I was holding slipped back into the soapy water. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, my wet hands gripping the edge of the sink. Because in that silence, I heard the echo of 1,000 words I never said. I heard the ghost of an apology he waited for 10 long years. An apology I was too proud, too stubborn to give. And now, it was too late. My husband, Arthur, was gone. And he took my chance to make things right with him. I remember driving to the hospital. The roads were a blur. My son, David, was in the passenger seat, his face pale. He had come to pick me up. He had been the one to call Meyer. He didn't say a word to me. He just stared out the window. The silence in the car was heavier than any silence I have ever known. It was filled with all the things we weren't saying. All the things we had avoided for a decade. I wanted to tell David I was sorry. Sorry for the distance between us. Sorry for the rift that had split our family in two. A rift that started with his father and me. But the words stuck in my throat. They felt like a betrayal of the stance I had held for so long. When we got to the hospital room, it was quiet. Meyer was sitting by the bed, holding her grandfather's hand. Arthur looked peaceful. He looked like he was just sleeping. But his chest was still. There was no gentle rise and fall. I stood in the doorway, unable to move. I couldn't go to him. I couldn't touch his hand. How could I? The last time we had touched was 10 years ago. It was a sharp, angry gesture as he walked out the door of our family home. Our last words to each other were not "I love you." They were words of pride and hurt. I told him he was being unreasonable. He told me I was being cold. And that was it. A decade of silence. David went to Meyer and put his arm around her. They were a unit, comforting each other. I remained by the door, an outsider in my own family's tragedy. A nurse came in and spoke to David in a soft, respectful tone. She called him the next of kin. I flinched. I was still Arthur's wife. On paper, anyway. We never divorced. We just stopped being married. We lived in the same city, but in different worlds. He moved into a small apartment. I stayed in the house we bought together 4 to 5 years ago. The house where we raised our son. The house that was once filled with so much laughter. The doctor said it was a massive heart attack. It was quick. He wouldn't have felt any pain. I hoped that was true. I hoped Arthur hadn't spent his last moments thinking of me. Thinking of our fight. I hoped his last thoughts were of happier times. Of David as a little boy. Of our trips to the beach. Of the way we used to dance in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. But a dark, guilty part of me feared they were. I feared he thought of the apology I never gave. The one he waited for. The one I convinced myself he didn't deserve. They asked me about funeral arrangements. I let David handle everything. What right did I have to plan his father's send-off? I had forfeited that right 10 years ago. I stayed in the background. I answered questions when asked. I nodded my head. But my heart was not in it. My heart was trapped in the past. It was stuck in a loop, replaying that one argument, that one moment I could have chosen differently. I could have chosen us. But I chose my pride instead. And now, I was a widow in a house full of ghosts, living with the weight of a silence I had created. I met Arthur in the spring of 1970. I was 22. He was 24. He had a smile that could light up a room. I saw him at a friend's birthday party. He was standing by the record player, talking about music. He was passionate and loud and so full of life. I was shy back then. I preferred to watch from the corners. But he saw me. He walked right up to me and asked me to dance. I told him I didn't know how. He just smiled and said, "And neither do I. We can learn together." And we did. We danced terribly that night. We stepped on each other's feet and laughed until our sides hurt. That was Arthur. He was all warmth and light. He pulled me out of my shell. He made me feel brave. We got married 2 years later. It was a small wedding in my parents' backyard. My father wasn't sure about him. He thought Arthur was too impulsive. Too much of a dreamer. But I loved that about him. He saw possibilities where others saw problems. He wanted to travel the world. He wanted to write a novel. He wanted to build a life that was an adventure. And for a long, long time, that is exactly what we did. We bought our first house. It was a tiny little place with a big backyard. We didn't have much money. The furniture was a mix of hand-me-downs and things we found at flea markets. But it was ours. We painted the walls together. I remember he got more paint on himself than on the walls. We were happy. We were so deeply, simply happy. Then David came along. Our beautiful boy. He had my eyes and Arthur's smile. Arthur was a wonderful father. He was the dad who would get on the floor and play with toy cars. He was the dad who read bedtime stories with different voices for every character. Arthur worked as a manager at a local furniture store. It was a good, stable job. But it wasn't his dream. His dream was his writing. Every night, after David was asleep and the dishes were done, he would sit at the small desk in our bedroom and write. He filled notebooks with his stories. He was working on a novel. A big, sprawling family saga. He never showed it to anyone. Not even to me. He said it wasn't ready. He said he wanted it to be perfect before anyone saw it. I supported him. I always made sure he had that quiet time in the evenings. I believed in him. I believed he would do it one day. As the years went by, life got busier. David grew up. He started school. He made friends. He played sports. Our lives became a whirlwind of school events and parent-teacher meetings and birthday parties. Arthur's writing time got shorter. Some nights, he was just too tired. The novel slowly moved to the back burner. He never complained. He was a devoted father. He never missed a baseball game or school play. But sometimes, I would catch him looking at his stack of notebooks with a sad, faraway look in his eyes. I would ask him about it. He would just shake his head and say, "It's nothing, my love. Just thinking." When David left for college, the house felt so empty. It was just Arthur and me again. But we weren't the same people who had danced in the kitchen. The silence between us felt different. It wasn't a comfortable silence anymore. It was a silence filled with things we weren't talking about. His dream of writing seemed to have faded completely. He talked about retiring from the store. He talked about buying a boat and learning to sail. New dreams. But they didn't have the same fire. I had started my own little business by then. I sold homemade jams and baked goods at the local farmer's market. It was my thing. It made me feel independent. It made me feel proud. I think that was the beginning of the shift. I had found my own voice, my own passion. And Arthur seemed to have lost his. He was happy for me, of course. He was always my biggest cheerleader. But there was a distance growing. We were on parallel paths, living in the same house, but not really living the same life. We still loved each other. I know we did. It was a deep, steady love, built over decades. But it was like a garden that hadn't been watered in a while. It was still alive, but it was starting to wilt. We didn't see it then. Or maybe we didn't want to see it. Then David graduated. He got a job in the city. He met a wonderful woman named Sarah. We loved her immediately. She was kind and smart, and she made David so happy. When they got married, it was one of the happiest days of my life. Seeing my son so in love, starting his own family. Arthur cried during the father-son dance. He was so proud of the man David had become. A year later, Maya was born. Our little granddaughter. She was the light of our lives. She brought us all together again. For a few years, it felt like the old days. Family dinners every Sunday. Arthur bouncing Maya on his knee. The house was filled with laughter and joy once more. But underneath it all, the quiet distance between Arthur and me remained. We were expert at avoiding it. We focused on being grandparents. We talked about David and Sarah and Maya. We talked about the news. We talked about everything except us. Everything except the unspoken disappointment, the faded dreams, the quiet loneliness that had settled in the spaces between our words. We were a dam holding back a reservoir of unsaid things. And all it took was one crack for everything to come flooding out. The crack came on a Sunday. It was Maya's 8th birthday. We were having a party at our house. The whole family was there. David and Sarah. Aunts, uncles, cousins. The house was loud and chaotic in the best way. Kids were running around. The finances. We had a good retirement savings, but it was for our retirement. For traveling, for being comfortable. Not for him to chase a decades-old dream that, in my heart of hearts, I believed was a fantasy. Later that evening, after everyone had left and the house was clean, we were in the kitchen. The tension was thick. "You didn't seem very supportive," Arthur said quietly. He was loading the dishwasher. "I was being realistic, Arthur," I said, wiping down the counter. "A novel? At your age? It's a lovely hobby. But to think of it as a new career." He closed the dishwasher door with a little too much force. "It's not about a new career, Helen. It's not about money. It's about me. It's about finally finishing something I started a lifetime ago. It's important to me." "And what about what's important for us?" I asked, turning to face him. "We've been planning our retirement for years. We were going to take that trip to Italy. We were going to visit the national parks. How are we supposed to do that if you're locked away in a room writing?" "So, that's what this is about," he said, his voice rising slightly. "Your travel plans?" "It's about our plans, Arthur. Our plans together. This writing thing, it's a solitary pursuit. It will just be you, alone, like it always was. Where do I fit into that? Where does our life together fit into that?" He looked at me, and the hurt in his eyes was so deep it almost took my breath away. "It was always a part of me, Helen. You knew that when you married me. You used to support this dream. That was a lifetime ago," I said, my voice sharp with frustration. "We were kids with our heads in the clouds. We have responsibilities now. We have a life to live in the real world." "The real world," he repeated, the words flat. "And what is my writing? A fantasy? A silly little dream unworthy of your real world?" I didn't answer. I just turned back to the counter and scrubbed at a spot that wasn't there. In that moment, I felt so practical, so grounded. I felt I was the only one being sensible. I didn't see the man whose spirit I was crushing. I only saw the potential for disappointment, for wasted time, for a retirement spent waiting for him. That was the start of the Cold War. We didn't have big shouting matches. We had quiet, clipped conversations. We slept in the same bed, but we faced opposite walls. He started spending more time in the spare bedroom, which he called his study. He brought his old typewriter up from the basement. The click-clack of the keys at night, which I had once found comforting, now felt like an accusation. Every click was a reminder of the argument. Every clack was a symbol of the divide between us. I tried to talk about Italy again. I showed him brochures. I talked about the Amalfi Coast. He would just nod and say, "It looks lovely, Helen." But there was no light in his eyes. His mind was elsewhere. He was living in the world of his novel. He was distant, preoccupied. I felt like I was living with a ghost. A ghost who was constantly reminding me that I didn't believe in him. David and Sarah noticed the tension. They would come over for dinner and the conversation would be strained. Maya would try to get her grandfather to play, and he would try, but his heart wasn't in it. He was always thinking about his story. One day, David pulled me aside. "Mom, is everything okay with you and Dad? He seems different." "Your father is going through a phase," I said, brushing it off. "He'll come back to Earth soon enough." I was so sure I was right. I was so sure he would see the folly of his pursuit and come back to me. Back to our real life. I was waiting for him to apologize for his distance, for his neglect of our plans. I didn't realize he was waiting for an apology from me. An apology for not having faith in him. For dismissing his dream. For making him feel that the most important part of himself was silly and unimportant. The dam was straining. And the flood was coming. The flood came 6 months after Maya's birthday party. Arthur had officially retired. His days were now completely his own. He would get up early, make coffee, and disappear into the study. He would often be in there until late in the evening. I was alone in the big, empty house all day. My jam business had slowed down. I had too much time to think. Too much time to feel the silence. One evening, I decided I had enough. I made his favorite meal, pot roast with roasted potatoes. I set the table nicely. I even lit a candle. I was going to try to bridge this gap. I was going to be the bigger person. When he came out of the study for dinner, he looked tired. His glasses were perched on the end of his nose. He had ink smudges on his fingers. "Dinner looks wonderful, Helen," he said, sitting down. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The only sound was the clinking of cutlery. "So," I began, my voice deliberately light. "How is the great American novel coming along?" He looked up at me. He must have heard the slight edge in my voice. "It's coming," he said simply. "Have you shown it to anyone? Gotten any feedback?" I asked, cutting a piece of potato. "No. Not yet." "Well, maybe you should. There are writing groups. You could see if it's any good before you invest too much more time in it." I meant it to be helpful. I truly did. I thought I was offering a practical suggestion. But as the words left my mouth, I knew they were wrong. I saw his face close up. His shoulders slumped. "Before I invest too much more time," he repeated slowly. He put his fork down. "Helen, do you have any idea what this means to me?" "Of course I do, Arthur. But we have to be practical. You've been at this for 6 months. What do you have to show for it? A stack of paper? Is that more important than our life? Than our time together?" "What is our life, Helen?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Tell me. What is this life you're so desperate for us to get back to? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a series of checklists. Trip to Italy. Check. Visit national parks. Check. Sit in quiet retirement and wait to die. Check. That's not fair," I said, my voice trembling. "I want us to have experiences. I want us to make memories together." "And I am making something," he said, his voice rising for the first time. I am creating something that never existed before. That is my experience. That is my memory. Why can't you see that? Why can't you respect that? Because it's a fantasy, Arthur. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. It was a lovely dream when you were 24. But you are a 68-year-old retired store manager. You are not a novelist. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and cruel. I saw him physically recoil, as if I had struck him. The light in his eyes, the little flicker of passion that had been there all these months, went out completely. It was replaced by a deep, profound sadness. He looked down at his hands. He slowly took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he looked up at me, his face was a mask of resignation. All these years, he said, his voice a hollow whisper. I thought you were my partner. I thought you were on my side. Even when you didn't understand, I thought you, of all people, believed in me. But you don't. You never did. Arthur, that's not true. It is true, he interrupted, his voice gaining a little strength. You think my dream is silly. You think my passion is a waste of time. You think the most essential part of who I am is a joke. He stood up. I can't live with that, Helen. I can't live with someone who looks at my soul and sees something to be tolerated, not cherished. What are you saying? I asked, my heart pounding. I'm saying I can't do this anymore. He walked out of the dining room. I heard him go upstairs. I stood there, frozen, by the table with the candle still flickering. I heard drawers opening and closing. He was packing a bag. My mind was racing. This was going too far. He was being dramatic. He would calm down. He would come to his senses. He wouldn't actually leave. A few minutes later, he came back downstairs with a small suitcase. He was wearing his coat. Arthur, don't be ridiculous, I said, my voice shaky. Where will you go? I'll get a hotel for now. Then I'll find an apartment. This is your home. He stopped at the front door and looked at me. There were tears in his eyes. No, Helen. A home is a place where you are loved for who you are. All of who you are. This is just a house. He opened the door. Arthur, wait. I cried out. If you walk out that door. He paused, his back to me. He was waiting. He was giving me one last chance. This was the moment. This was where I could have swallowed my pride. I could have said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I don't understand. Please don't go. The words were right there, on the tip of my tongue. But my pride was a fortress. It had thick, high walls. The words couldn't get out. If you walk out that door, I repeated, my voice cold and hard, don't expect me to come running after you. He didn't turn around. He just nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed everything he already thought. Goodbye, Helen, he said softly. And he walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. The sound was so final. It was the sound of the end. I stood in the silent dining room, surrounded by the ruins of our life together, and I still believed he would come back. I still believed I was right. He waited for an apology I never gave. And I waited for him to come home. We were both waiting for something that would never happen. The first few weeks after he left were strange. I was angry. I was so angry. How could he do this? How could he throw away 4 to 5 years of marriage over a silly argument? Over his pride? I told myself that over and over. It was his pride. Not mine. I was the wronged party. He had abandoned me. I filled my days with busy work. I cleaned the house from top to bottom. I reorganized every closet. I baked until the freezer was full. I refused to let myself feel the gaping hole he had left. David was devastated. He tried to talk to me. "Mom, you have to talk to him. You can't just let this happen. Your father made his choice, David," I would say, my voice tight. "He chose his novel over his family." "Did he?" David asked once, his eyes searching my face. "Or did he just choose to finally respect himself?" That question stung. I didn't have an answer for it. I changed the subject. I heard through David that Arthur had rented a small, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. David visited him. He said the apartment was sparse, but there was a desk by the window covered in papers. Arthur seemed okay, David said. Sad, but determined. He was still writing. Months turned into a year. The anger slowly faded, leaving behind a dull, constant ache. The house was so quiet. I missed the sound of his typewriter. I missed the way he hummed in the morning when he made coffee. I missed his presence. I started to see our life together from a different angle. I remembered the young man who was so full of dreams. I remembered how I had loved that about him. When did I stop? When did his dreams become a nuisance to me? The first Christmas without him was the worst. David, Sarah, and Meyer came over. We tried to make it cheerful. We put up a tree. We exchanged gifts. But his armchair was empty. It felt like we were playing a game of happy family, and everyone knew the script except me. I saw the sadness in David's eyes when he looked at me. There was a distance between us now, too. I could feel it. He loved his father, and he saw my stubbornness as the reason for the break. A year passed. Then, too, I would sometimes drive past his apartment building. I never saw him. I just sat in my car and looked at the windows, wondering which one was his. Wondering what he was doing. Was he writing? Was he thinking of me? Was he waiting for me to call? I thought about calling him 1,000 times. I would pick up the phone, my heart racing, and then put it down again. What would I say? "Hello, Arthur, it's Helen. I was wondering if you've come to your senses yet?" No. That wasn't right. I knew what I needed to say. I needed to say, "I'm sorry." But those two words felt like climbing a mountain. My pride wouldn't let me start the climb. I started having dreams about him. Happy dreams. We were young, dancing at that party. We were painting the house. We were holding baby David. I would wake up with tears on my pillow, the emptiness in the bed next to me feeling colder than ever. On what would have been our 47th anniversary, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went up to the spare bedroom, his old study. I hadn't set foot in it since he left. A thin layer of dust covered everything. His typewriter was still there, a sheet of paper rolled into it. I walked over and looked at it. It was the title page. It read, The Man Who Danced, a novel by Arthur Phillips. My heart clenched. The Man Who Danced. I remembered that night. I remembered him saying, "And neither do I. We can learn together." He was writing about us. This novel, this a silly dream, it was about our life. About our story. I felt a sob rise in my throat. I had not just dismissed a hobby. I had dismissed his love letter to our life together. I sat down in his chair and cried. I cried for the young man with the bright smile. I cried for the dreams we had shared. I cried for the hurt I had caused him. I cried for the years we had lost. For the first time, I saw the truth with blinding clarity. This wasn't his fault. It was mine. I was the one who had been cold. I was the one who had been unsupportive. I had let the practicalities of life kill the magic in our marriage. I had failed him. I had my apology. It was right there, fully formed in my heart. It was sincere and deep and painful. But still, I didn't call. A strange paralysis set in. So much time had passed. What if he had moved on? What if he didn't want to hear from me? What if my apology was too little, too late? The fear of his rejection was even greater than my pride now. So I did nothing. I carried my apology with me like a heavy, precious stone, with no one to give it to. 5 years passed. Then 10. We settled into a strange, sad routine. David would have 2 Christmases, one with me, one with his father. 2 birthdays for Meyer. We were a family divided. I saw Arthur only once, from a distance, at Meyer's high school graduation. He looked older. His hair was completely white. He was sitting with David and Sarah. He looked peaceful. He was laughing at something Maya said. He had built a life without me. The sight was a physical pain. I left quickly after the ceremony. I couldn't face him. And then, the phone call. Grandpa isn't waking up. The hospital. The silence. The funeral. The funeral was small. It was at a quiet chapel. Arthur had left instructions with David. He wanted it to be simple. David gave the eulogy. He talked about his father's love of stories. His big heart. His terrible dancing. People laughed through their tears. I sat in the front row, my back straight, my hands clenched in my lap. I was the widow who wasn't really a wife. I felt every eye on me. I felt the weight of their unspoken questions. After the service, people came up to me to offer their condolences. They said, I'm so sorry for your loss, Helen." Their words felt like lies. What loss were they sorry for? The loss of a husband I hadn't lived with for 10 years? The loss of a man I had driven away? I just nodded and thanked them, my face a mask of polite grief. Back at my house, after the burial, David handed me a small, flat box. It was wrapped in simple brown paper. "Dad wanted you to have this," he said, his voice gentle. "He gave it to me a few years ago. He said to give it to you when the time came." My hands trembled as I took the box. It was heavy. What was it? A final rebuke? A parting shot? I waited until I was completely alone. The last of the guests had left. The house was silent once more, but this silence was different. It was a permanent silence. Arthur was truly gone. I sat in his armchair, the one he had left empty a decade ago, and I carefully untied the string on the box. I lifted the lid. Inside was a manuscript. A thick stack of paper, neatly bound. On the top was the title page. "The Man Who Danced," by Arthur Phillips. And below the title, in his neat handwriting, it said, "For Helen. The woman who taught me how." I waited, my love. I'm sorry I couldn't wait forever. A sob escaped my lips. I held the manuscript to my chest as if it were him. He had finished it. He had finished his novel. And he had dedicated it to me. For days, I couldn't bring myself to read it. I was afraid. Afraid of what I would find in those pages. A story of our love? Or a story of our failure? Finally, one rainy afternoon, I made a pot of tea, sat in my chair by the window, and began to read. It was our story. From the moment we met at the party. The dancing. The painting of the house. The birth of our son. The joy, the struggles, the quiet years. He had captured it all with such tenderness, such love. He wrote about a man who was full of dreams and a woman who was his anchor. He didn't paint me as a villain. He painted me as a real, complicated person. He wrote about my strength, my practicality, my love for our family. He even wrote about our fight. But in his version, the man understood the woman's fear. He understood that her anger came from a place of love, from a fear of losing the life they had built together. He had forgiven me long before I had even asked for forgiveness. He had seen my heart better than I had seen it myself. The novel ended not with their separation, but with a scene years later. The man, now old, is looking at a photograph of his wife. He isn't bitter. He is filled with a deep, abiding love for her. He understands that sometimes, love isn't enough to bridge the gaps that life creates. But that doesn't make the love any less real. Or any less precious. The last line of the book was, "Ere and in the quiet of the evening, he would dance with her in his memory," and it was enough. It had to be. I closed the manuscript and wept. I wept for the beauty of his soul. I wept for his capacity for love and forgiveness. And I wept for my own blindness. He had waited for an apology, not because he needed to hear he was right, but because he needed to know that I still saw the man he was. The man who danced. And I never gave it to him. I had withheld the one thing that could have brought him home. In the weeks and months that followed, a strange peace settled over me. The guilt was still there. It would always be there. But it was no longer a sharp, stabbing pain. It was a soft, chronic ache, a part of me now, like a scar over my heart. I had finally let go of my pride. There was no one left to fight with. No one left to prove wrong. I started talking to David more openly. I told him I was sorry. Sorry for the part one played in the rift. Sorry for the pain I caused his father. Sorry for the years we lost as a complete family. He hugged me tightly. "He loved you, Mom," he whispered. "Until the very end. He always did. I know that now. I feel it in every word of his novel. I feel it in the quiet of this house. I have his manuscript on my bookshelf. I take it down sometimes and read a random page. I hear his voice in the words. I see his smile. I have started to dance again, sometimes, in the kitchen. Just a little sway when a good song comes on the radio. I'm learning, even now. The lesson is this, I think. Love is not about being right. It is not about practicalities or checklists. Love is about believing in the other person's soul, even when you don't understand their dreams. It is about saying I'm sorry when you have caused a hurt, whether you meant to or not. Pride is a poor companion for a lifetime. It offers cold comfort in an empty house. He waited for an apology I never gave. And in the end, his forgiveness was a gift he gave me anyway. A gift I never earned, but will cherish for the rest of my days. I talk to him sometimes, in the quiet of the evening. I tell him about my day. I tell him about David and Sarah and Meyer. And I finally say the words I should have said a long, long time ago. I'm sorry, Arthur. My love, I'm so sorry. And in the silence, I imagine I can hear the faint, familiar click-clack of a typewriter. And the memory of it is enough. It has to be. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe, like, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.